When my son asked me to stay at his house for a week, I thought we were finally reconnecting after years of distance. What I discovered on his computer that first night revealed that he was living the exact same destructive addiction that destroyed my marriage 20 years ago. If you've ever wondered whether your family secrets really protect anyone, this story will change everything you believe about love and honesty. Subscribe now and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because what happens next will shake you to your core. The addictions and secrets we refuse to face become cursed inheritances we pass to our children, perpetuating cycles of pain that only true love and the courage to confront ourselves can break. My name is Helena. I'm 58 years old, and I'm about to tell you how I discovered that running from the truth doesn't protect anyone. It destroys everything. I've been a librarian for most of my adult life, surrounded by other people's stories while refusing to face my own. And 15 years ago, my world collapsed when I found out my husband had been living a double life that involved pornography, addiction, and constant infidelity. The discovery didn't just end my marriage. It shattered my sense of reality because I had spent years blaming myself for his distance, his mood swings, his late nights at the computer, thinking I wasn't attractive enough, wasn't interesting enough, wasn't woman enough to keep him satisfied. When I finally saw the evidence with my own eyes, hundreds of browser tabs, credit card statements showing payments to cam sites, messages to other women, I realized I had been living with a stranger who had been feeding an addiction that consumed our family's resources, our intimacy, and our future. The divorce was brutal, not just legally, but emotionally, because I had to face the fact that I had ignored red flags for years. And worse, our son Diego had grown up in a house filled with tension, secrets, and emotional distance that I thought I was hiding from him. After the divorce, Diego chose to live with his father, and every time I tried to rebuild our relationship, I could see the walls he had built around his heart. The way he looked at me like I was the one who had destroyed the family by exposing the truth instead of keeping the peace. I've spent the last 15 years living alone in a small apartment filled with books and regrets, watching my son build his own life while keeping me at arm's length, seeing him only on holidays and special occasions where our conversations never went deeper than weather and work. What I never told anyone, not even my therapist, is that I developed my own addictions after the divorce. Not to pornography like my ex-husband, but to online shopping that gave me temporary highs when the loneliness became unbearable, and sleeping pills that promised me escape from the guilt that ate at me every night. I would stay up until 3 a.m. buying things I didn't need with money I didn't have, filling virtual shopping carts with clothes, books, kitchen gadgets, anything that made me feel like I was building a life instead of just surviving. And then I would take 2 or 3 pills to knock myself unconscious so I wouldn't have to think about the mess I was making or the son who barely spoke to me anymore. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was judging my ex-husband for his secret addiction while developing my own secret addictions. But I told myself mine were different. Mine were harmless. Mine were just coping mechanisms for the trauma he had caused. I convinced myself that my online shopping was just retail therapy and my sleeping pills were just medical necessity, not admitting that I was using them the same way he used pornography to escape reality and avoid dealing with the pain that was eating me alive from the inside. Every month, I would promise myself I would stop. I would delete the shopping apps. I would throw away the pills. I would call Diego and have a real conversation. But the loneliness always won, and I would find myself back in the same patterns, spending money I didn't have and taking pills to silence the voice in my head that whispered I was a failure as a wife and as a mother. This is who I was when Diego called me 6 months ago and asked me to house sit while he and his wife Sophia went on a couples retreat. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, he was ready to let me back into his life. When Diego called me that Tuesday afternoon and asked if I could house sit for him and Sophia while they went on a couples retreat, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real genuine hope that maybe my son was finally ready to let me back into his life after all these years of polite distance and surface-level conversations. He sounded different on the phone, warmer somehow, and when he said they needed someone they could trust to take care of their home, their plants, and their cat, I heard something in his voice that reminded me of the little boy who used to run to me when he was scared or hurt. I said yes immediately, probably too eagerly, but I didn't care because this felt like the olive branch I had been praying for, the chance to prove that I could be the mother he needed, that I could be trusted with something important to him. The week before I was supposed to go to their house, I planned everything meticulously. I bought fresh flowers to put in every room. I researched recipes for his favorite meals so I could stock their refrigerator with home-cooked food for when they returned. I even bought new sheets for their guest room because I wanted everything to be perfect when they came home. I wanted them to see that having me there had been a blessing, not a burden. When they dropped me off at their beautiful suburban home with the white picket fence and the perfectly manicured lawn, I felt like I was stepping into the life I had always imagined my son would have. Stable, secure, filled with love, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, all the pain and distance of the past 15 years had been worth it if it led to this happiness for him. Sophia hugged me goodbye and whispered that she was grateful I was there, that Diego had been stressed about work lately and this retreat was exactly what they needed to reconnect. And I promised her I would take perfect care of everything while they were gone. The first day was magical. I cleaned their house from top to bottom, even though it was already spotless. I watered their plants with the care of a professional gardener. I played with their cat and imagined what it would be like to be a grandmother someday, to have little voices calling me grandma in this very house. That evening, I decided to surprise them by organizing Diego's home office, which was cluttered with papers and books, and I thought if I could make his workspace beautiful and organized, he would come home to one less stress in his life. I was arranging his desk when I accidentally knocked over his coffee mug, spilling cold coffee all over his keyboard and computer mouse, and in my panic to clean up the mess before it damaged his equipment, I turned on his computer to make sure it was still working properly. The screen lit up and I was relieved to see everything seemed fine, but as I was about to turn it off, something caught my eye that made my blood run cold. There were dozens of browser tabs open at the bottom of the screen, and even though I tried not to look, I couldn't help but see the titles. RedTube, Pornhub, Xvideos, names that brought back memories I had spent 15 years trying to forget. My hands started shaking as I realized what I was seeing, but I told myself it was probably just pop-up ads, that it didn't mean anything, that I was being paranoid because of my own trauma. But as I tried to close the tabs, more appeared. Hundreds of them, dating back months, maybe years. I should have turned off the computer right then. I should have walked away and pretended I never saw anything, but something inside me snapped. The same something that had driven me to dig deeper into my ex-husband's secrets all those years. Ago, and before I could stop myself, I was clicking through his browser history, seeing page after page of pornographic websites, cam-girl platforms, dating apps where he had multiple profiles under fake names. The worst part wasn't just seeing the websites. It was seeing the timestamps 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. Hours when Sophia thought he was working late or dealing with insomnia. Hours when he was actually feeding. The same addiction that had destroyed my marriage and apparently now threatened to. I sat in Diego's office chair for what felt like hours, staring at the screen and trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, that there had to be an innocent explanation for what I was seeing. But deep down, I knew the truth because I had lived this nightmare before. I forced myself to close the computer and tried to focus on the reason I was there, to take care of their home with love. So I spent the next few hours arranging fresh flowers in every room, organizing their kitchen cabinets, and preparing a homemade lasagna to leave in their freezer, all while trying to push away the images I had seen and the terrible familiarity of it all. But that night, as I lay in their guest bed surrounded by the sounds of their happy home, I couldn't stop thinking about those timestamps, those late-night sessions that I recognized so well from my own marriage, and I found myself getting up at 2 in the morning and walking back to his office like a moth drawn to a flame. I told myself I was just going to print out a recipe I wanted to try for them, something innocent and loving. But the moment that computer screen lit up again, I was back in detective mode, clicking through folders and files with the same desperate need for truth that had consumed me 15 years ago. What I found next made my legs go weak, because buried in a folder labeled work documents were dozens of credit card statements that Diego had been hiding from Sophia. Statements showing charges to cam sites, premium pornography subscriptions, and something called private chat sessions that totaled over $50,000 in the past 2 years alone. $50,000 that should have been going toward their mortgage, their future, maybe even grandchildren I would never get to meet if this addiction destroyed their marriage the way it had destroyed mine. I printed out those statements, with shaking hands, not because I planned to confront anyone, but because I needed proof that this wasn't just my imagination, that I wasn't projecting my own trauma onto an innocent situation. And as I held those papers in my hands, I felt the same sick feeling in my stomach that I had felt the day I discovered my husband's secrets. The feeling that everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. I should have stopped there. I should have put those papers away and tried to forget what I had seen, but something inside me had been awakened. The same compulsive need to know the whole truth that had driven me to dig deeper into my ex-husband's betrayals all those years ago. Over the next 3 days, while I continued to play the role of the perfect house sitter, watering plants and feeding their cat, I found myself spending hours each night going through Diego's digital life like a forensic investigator, and what I discovered broke my heart in ways I didn't know were possible. I found chat logs with women whose profile pictures showed them in lingerie, Conversations where my son was paying them to perform sexual acts on camera while he told them about his fantasies and his frustrations with his marriage. Conversations where he was spending hundreds of dollars per session to feel desired and understood by strangers who were paid to make him feel special. I read messages where he complained about Sophia being too tired for intimacy, too focused on her career, too emotionally distant. And I recognized every single complaint because they were the same ones his father had made about me before I discovered his addiction. The worst part was finding his profiles on dating apps where he was actively looking for affairs, using fake names and photos that didn't show his wedding ring, describing himself as single and ready for adventure, and I realized that my son wasn't just consuming pornography. He was actively seeking to cheat on his wife. Maybe he already had. As I scrolled through these apps and saw the women he had been messaging, women who looked nothing like Sophia, women who were younger, more provocative, more available, I felt like I was watching my own marriage dissolve all over again, except this time it was my son who was the predator and some innocent woman who reminded me of myself at that age who was the victim. I found myself taking screenshots of everything, not because I had any plan for what to do with them, but because I needed evidence that this wasn't a nightmare, that my son had truly become the man I had divorced, that the cycle I had prayed would end with my generation was continuing with his. But the discovery that truly shattered me was finding photos on his phone that he had taken of Sophia while she was sleeping, intimate photos that he was sharing in private chat rooms with strangers, violating her privacy and dignity in ways that made me physically sick. And I realized that the sweet woman who had hugged me goodbye and trusted me with her home had no idea that her husband was betraying her in the most fundamental ways possible. On the fourth night, as I sat surrounded by printed evidence of my son's secret life, I caught sight of myself in the reflection of his computer screen and suddenly saw the truth I had been avoiding. I was doing exactly what I had accused him of doing. I was living a secret life, feeding my own addictions, lying to myself about my own behaviors, and I realized that I had no right to judge him when I was just as broken as he was. The compulsive way I had been investigating his digital life was the same compulsive way I shopped online at 3 a.m, buying things I didn't need to fill a void that couldn't be filled with material possessions and the way I was. Obsessing over his secrets was the same way I obsessed over every detail of my ex-husband's betrayals, turning my pain into an addiction to drama and investigation that kept me from facing my own emptiness. I remembered all the nights during Diego's childhood when I had been so consumed with monitoring his father's computer usage, so focused on finding evidence of his affairs that I had barely been present for my son's homework, his school events, his emotional needs, and I realized that I had taught Diego that love looked like surveillance, that marriage looked like secrets and suspicion, that intimacy looked like living parallel lives in the same house. I had been so busy being the victim of my husband's addiction that I had never acknowledged how my own addictions to sleeping pills and shopping had made me emotionally unavailable to my child, how my constant anxiety and paranoia had created an atmosphere of tension that my son had learned to escape through fantasy and isolation. The most painful realization was that I had divorced my husband for being a man who lived secret lives and fed compulsions he couldn't control. But I had never gotten help for my own secret lives and compulsions. I had just changed the substances and behaviors while keeping the same patterns of shame, secrecy, and self-medication. As I looked at the evidence of Diego's addiction spread across his desk, I understood that I hadn't saved him from his father's legacy. I had contributed to it by modeling my own version of addictive behavior and emotional unavailability, and now my son was repeating both of our patterns in his own marriage, creating the same environment of secrets and shame that would probably destroy his relationship with Sophia the way it had destroyed my relationship with him. On the 6th day, I was in their kitchen preparing dinner and trying to convince myself that I could somehow put all the evidence back where I found it and pretend this week had been nothing but a peaceful house-sitting experience. When I heard Diego's car in the driveway 3 days earlier than expected, my heart started racing because I wasn't prepared to face him. I had all those printed bank statements and screenshots scattered across the guest room like evidence in a crime scene, and I quickly tried to gather everything and hide it before he came inside. But when he walked through the front door, I could see immediately that something was wrong. His face was red with anger. His clothes were wrinkled like he had been sleeping in them. And when he saw me standing there with obvious panic in my eyes, he stopped and stared at me with a look I had never seen before. A look that told me he already knew that I knew. We stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity. And finally, I found the courage to ask him why he was home early. And that's when he exploded, telling me that Sophia had accused him of being emotionally unavailable during their retreat, that she had said he seemed distracted and distant, that their couples therapist had suggested he might be dealing with some kind of addiction or secret that was affecting their intimacy. The irony of Sophia unknowingly diagnosing the exact problem while I was discovering the evidence of it was not lost on me, and I realized that this moment had been inevitable. That the truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply we try to bury it. I took a deep breath and told Diego that we needed to talk, that I had accidentally discovered some things while I was staying in their house. And I watched his face go from anger to fear to rage as I explained about the spilled coffee, the computer, the bank statements, and everything else I had found. But instead of shame or remorse, what I saw in my son's eyes was pure fury. And he started screaming at me, calling me a hypocrite, a snoop, a pathetic woman who had never gotten over her own failed marriage, that I had now tried to judge him when I had spent his entire childhood popping pills and shopping online instead of being a real mother. That he had learned to live secret lives because that's what I had taught him by example. That I had been so busy playing detective with his father that I had never actually been present for him emotionally. Every word he said hit me like a physical blow because I knew it was true, but what hurt most was hearing the pain in his voice. The years of accumulated resentment and abandonment that I had never realized I was causing, and I understood that my son's addiction wasn't just about following his father's example, it was also about filling the emotional void that I had created by being physically present but emotionally absent throughout his childhood. I tried to defend myself to explain that I had been doing the best I could while dealing with my own trauma. But Diego cut me off and said the words that shattered my heart completely. He told me that he had always known about my pill addiction, my shopping binges, my late-night internet obsessions, and that watching me lie to myself about my own problems, while judging his father had taught him that all adults were hypocrites who lived double lives. Just as I was trying to process the devastation of my son's words, we heard Sophia's key in the front door, and she walked into our confrontation at the exact moment when Diego was screaming that I had ruined his life by being a fake mother, who was more interested in playing victim than actually taking care of her child. Sophia stood frozen in the doorway, still wearing her retreat clothes and carrying a suitcase covered with couples therapy stickers. And I watched her face change as she absorbed what she was hearing, as she realized that the man she had married was not only hiding massive addictions and financial secrets, but was also capable of speaking to his mother with such cruelty and rage. Diego turned to Sophia and tried to explain, tried to minimize what she had walked into, but she just shook her head and said she had heard enough, that the emotional distance she had been feeling wasn't her imagination, that the financial stress they had been experiencing wasn't due to his work situation, and that she couldn't be married to someone who lived secret lives while blaming everyone else for his problems. That night, Sophia packed a bag and left to stay with her sister, and Diego stormed out of the house after screaming at me to get out and never come back. And I found myself alone in their perfect suburban home, surrounded by the evidence of 3 generations of addiction and emotional dysfunction. Finally understanding that my silence and shame hadn't protected anyone, they had created the very problems I had been trying to avoid. 3 days after that devastating confrontation, I sat alone in my apartment surrounded by all the evidence I had gathered, and I realized that I had 2 choices. I could either disappear from Diego's life forever and let our family destroy itself with secrets and blame, or I could do something I had never done before in my entire life: tell the complete truth about who I really was and what I had done wrong. I had spent 15 years blaming my ex-husband for our family's destruction, but sitting there with those bank statements and screenshots, I finally admitted to myself that I had been just as addicted, just as secretive, and just as emotionally unavailable as he was, and that my son had learned his patterns of behavior from both of us. So I did the scariest thing I had ever done. I called Diego and asked if I could come over to talk to him one more time. And when he reluctantly agreed, I brought with me something I had never shown anyone before: my own collection of credit card statements showing thousands of dollars in online shopping addictions, my prescription bottles showing years of sleeping pill dependency, and a letter I had never sent to him apologizing for being absent during his childhood while I was consumed with my own pain and obsessions. When I sat across from my son in his living room, the same living room where we had screamed at each other 3 days earlier, I took a deep breath and said the words I should have said 15 years ago. I told him that I was addicted to that. I had been living secret lives just like his father, that I had failed him as a mother by being so focused on my own trauma that I never actually helped him process his rot, and that everything he had said about me during our fight was absolutely true. I watched Diego's face change as I spoke, the anger slowly giving way to something I hadn't seen since he was a child: vulnerability. And when I finished confessing my own failures, he started crying for the first time in years and told me that he had been waiting his whole life for me to admit that I wasn't perfect, that I had made mistakes, that I was human just like him. I asked Diego if he would be willing to go to therapy with me, not as a mother trying to fix her son, but as 2 people with addictions who wanted to break the cycle that had been destroying our family for generations. And through his tears, he said yes. When Sophia came back a week later, she didn't come back because the problems were solved. She came back because she saw a family that was finally willing to fight for healing instead of just fighting each other. And she told us that she would try to save their marriage, but only if Diego committed to addiction recovery, couples therapy, and complete financial transparency. That conversation marked the beginning of the hardest and most honest period of our lives, where we all had to face our demons together instead of hiding from them separately. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt like we might actually have a chance to become the family we had always pretended to be. I used to live behind a carefully constructed facade of perfect smiles and rehearsed answers. For years, I believed that protecting my son meant shielding him from my struggles, my fears, my moments of doubt. I thought love meant being an unbreakable fortress, never letting him see the cracks in my armor. But I was wrong, terribly, devastatingly. Wrong. Every "how are you?" became a trigger that activated my social mask, while inside, rage built like a hungry monster. It was my personal Hulk, the fury of a woman who had swallowed so many words they turned to poison in her veins. I smile, nod, say everything's fine while my world crumbles around me. The perfect mother, the perfect woman, the perfect lie. The breaking point came when I realized my son had inherited my fake smile, my empty responses. He learned to hide his pain exactly as I taught him, through the silent example of a mother pretending to be invincible. The painful identification with that distorted reflection hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't protecting anyone. I was perpetuating a cycle of masked loneliness. My transformation began the moment I allowed tears to fall in front of him. For the first time, I said, "I don't know how to fix this," instead of "everything will be okay." That simple phrase shattered decades of emotional armor. I discovered that showing my flaws didn't make me weaker. It made me more human. Admitting fears didn't scare my son. It freed him to have his own fears. True love isn't a shield that protects from pain, but a bridge that allows us to cross it together. I learned that courage isn't about not feeling fear, but about feeling fear and choosing to love anyway. Vulnerability became my strength. Truth became my weapon against the lies I'd been living. What about you? How many secrets do you keep in the name of protecting your family? How many times have you pretended to be okay while your addictions, whatever they may be, have grown in the dark? Here's the truth. Our kids don't need perfect parents. They need real parents. They need to see that life is a struggle, but that it's possible to fight together. Let me ask you something that might trigger your defense mechanisms. When was the last time you let your family see you cry? When was the last time you admitted, "I'm scared," or "I don't have all the answers"? If you can't remember, you're not protecting them, you're teaching them to hide their pain. Your Hulk moment, that anger, that frustration, that moment when you want to not weakness. It's humanity trying to break through the walls you've built. Your kids are watching, learning that emotions are dangerous, that vulnerability is shameful, that true feelings should be buried alive. Here's the brutal moment of identification. Your children are becoming exactly what you're modeling. If you're fake, they'll be fake. If you're distant, they'll be distant. If you deal with problems by pretending they don't exist, guess what they'll do when life hits them? But here's the beautiful truth. You can change that pattern. Today, right now, in this moment, today, pick one person in your family and share one real struggle you're facing. It doesn't have to be the worst, but it does have to be real. Say something like, "I've been struggling with," or "I'm worried about," or "I don't know how to deal with." Notice how this honesty becomes the first building block in building deeper relationships. Notice how your vulnerability gives others permission to be human too. It's not about dumping all your problems on your family. It's about showing them that real people have real struggles. And real love means facing them together, not alone in the shadows. Or share your struggles and victories here in the comments. This is the place where we open up and help each other. Remember that your pain can be someone else's healing. Leave your comment and subscribe to the channel. Keep watching this video that